When you think about Batman in the New 52, everybody raves about the Scott Snyder run, but what about the series by Peter J. Tomasi? Woof woof! Hey guys, it's me Marcus aka the Mad Dog and we're back with another video. Beginning with issue 20 of the Batman and Robin series that was started by Grant Morrison, the creative team of Patrick Gleason and Peter J. Tomasi took over the title for 3 issues in 2011. However, when the New 52 started after the Flashpoint event, this duo decided to stay on and the title became part of the Batman family of books. No award there if you guessed that one. Although Gleason didn't do the art for every issue in the book, he and Tomasi stayed on till issue 40 when the series came to an end in 2015. Fill-in artists including big names such as Andy Kubert and Doug Mahnke contributed to this run alongside a handful of others. During this time, events like the Court of Owls, Death of the Family, Forever Evil and the Batman Incorporated series occurred, which meant that the story for this run had to be impacted. After the series ended, the popularity of this collaborative team meant that they went to work on other titles such as Super Sons and the other big figure within the DC universe, Superman. But for now, let's take a journey back and just look at Batman and Robin. This is my TLDW, it's a part of the video for people who don't have time to watch the full thing but you still want to know if this book's for you. With Batman and Robin, although it is enjoyable, it might leave you wondering what could have been if the implications of the wider DC universe hadn't affected the long-term plan of this series. There are still moments of greatness that do make this worth a read and the art is superb throughout, but there were still quite a number of moments where I felt like this was a supplementary series to another run than something that stood on its own 2 feet. But if that's all the review that you needed, thank you for tuning in and make sure you give this video a thumbs up and subscribe if you're new here and click the bell notification so that you never miss a video. The book begins as part of the main DC universe with Dick Grayson in the role of Batman. He and Damian, who is currently Robin but also the son of Bruce Wayne, take on an unknown villain that is targeting innocent civilians, but all of which have a dark family connection that the dynamic duo has to uncover before it's too late. Then we shift to the New 52 and Bruce Wayne is back under the mantle of the Dark Knight. He and Damian are still finding their groove as being crime fighters by night but family by day. But when a shadowy figure from Batman's past starts targeting international members of the Bat family, this will ignite a rift between father and son that will make them question the core of the Dark Knight ethos. And between balancing his responsibilities as both a father and a protector of Gotham, Bruce will question if his training methods and faith in Damian will be his ultimate weakness. And with appearances from Two-Face, the Joker, Ra's al Ghul and adopting a dog named Titus, there is more than enough to keep them busy. But what will Batman discover when he's forced to confront his own ideology and beliefs? How will the pressures of being Gotham's protector affect his ability to be a father? And when Bruce's greatest fear is realised, how will the dynamic duo be able to survive? For the majority of this book, Patrick Gleason does the art and I love his style. He has this bright, vibrant style that at first doesn't seem like it belongs in a Batman title, but as the series goes on, you realise that this was the perfect fit for this story. Because you've got this contrast between the old guard and the new guard, and you've got Damian who's youthful and vibrant and a bit inventive in the way that he does things, and then you've got Bruce who's stuck in his ways but he knows that he gets the job done. I think that this is the best style that they could have utilised for that story. Because I enjoyed what I saw from him in Super Sons, and I just like how the style's pretty much the same but it's adapted more so for Batman. So it still does have that dark feel, it doesn't feel like you're reading a kid's book at any point, but it isn't as gritty as a lot of the other Batman books that I've read in the past. And that was a great choice to have a style that looked very different because of the fact that I feel like everybody always compares this run to the Scott Snyder one, so unfortunately it does feel like this is always on the back foot, but what I think Gleason does best is draw humans really well. There's this painting that they keep going back to because they were trying to have like a family portrait, and I just love the way that he gave them all just their own little details so that they were all separate from one another. The action was where he really excelled as well because of the fact that most Batman scenes are set at night. I just think that the range of colours that was used just really helped his art to pop even more. For some reason though, as much as I liked him drawing humans, they were often really pale. I felt like I was looking at myself in a Batman book. But what this helped me realise is that Patrick Gleason should be up there when you talk about the best of modern DC art. The action was great and it also had that blockbuster level of scale to it, and there were just so many fun and inventive designs that cropped up throughout this book that I feel like you could tell that Patrick Gleason was having a good time. It's nice when you have those collaborative teams and you just get the sense that they really enjoy working together in a similar way that we've got Ed Brubaker and Sean Phillips. What this book really reminded me of was Invincible, and that's the vibe that I got with Damian throughout because obviously he is more violent than Batman, he doesn't really have that same level of remorse, and you really got the sense that Patrick Gleason knew exactly how to show that. At no point did you ever feel like he wasn't a kid because I also felt like he had the scale correct between Batman and Robin. My favourite villain was probably Doug Mahnke in the Batman and Robin Week 1 story. I loved that part of the book, it's probably one of my highlights of it, and I think having a different artist at this point really just helped it to stand out a bit, because between him and Gleason, Monkey probably does have a more classic look to his art, so it made sense that he'd be telling the flashback story. Andy Kubert was great when he helped chip in, and it wasn't too much of a jarring change between him and Gleason. And with that part of the story being set somewhere else, having a change in art helped it to feel a bit otherworldly. But the art in the Moonshot story towards the end was both great and weird. There was this Frank Quitely aspect to the figures and the scenery. You really had a great sense of scale that's normally present in his books, but the way that this artist drew Mouse, just bizarre. I'm not sure why mouths are something that really bother me if it's drawn weird. Even if the rest of it's good, if the mouth doesn't look right, I'll still notice it. I think it was in Aquaman that I picked that up. Is this just a New 52 thing that people couldn't draw mouths during that time? However, the art in this book really seemed to shine when other figures from the DC universe cropped up in it, whether that be different heroes or just other members of the Bat family. It just really captured that sense of fun that you should have within a comic, and I think that's the best compliment that I could give to Patrick Gleason. He really made this book enjoyable. He gave it a sense of energy through his crisp lines, through the great colours that came throughout it, and also just loved his Gotham. He had a great sense of scale, and I actually wish we spent more time just in Gotham rather than always being in the Batcave or even just being off planet. It made me excited for their Superman Omnibus that's coming out later this year, and I just wish that this team could get a chance to do a full Justice League run. Like if they got 40 issues on that, I think that could be something special as well. But if I was to have to give a rating on the art alone, this would get 4 out of 5 bones. When I start these spoiler-free sections, I've normally got some kind of grand sweeping statement that I like to make, and then I elaborate on it, and I probably elaborate on it for way too long because I don't know when to shut up. But it's weird for me because this Batman and Robin book is the first one that I've read where I don't really feel like I've got a main point that I want to hone in on. Don't get me wrong, the book was enjoyable and fun, I just don't really think that it had something in it, or even like one really key moment that stood out so much that I think that this can be a timeless Batman story. It's similar to when I previously reviewed Punisher by Garth Ennis, because it feels like it's just a collection of stories. Obviously you've got one main through line throughout it, but it feels like because of the fact that there were so many other events that were going on that kind of disrupted the flow of this book, they never really got a chance to become what I think it intended to be. And in a weird, almost sadistic way, that makes me more excited to read their Superman run, because it seems like that isn't going to be interrupted by anything else. Before I even started reading this run, I saw people talking about it, and it was clear that they enjoyed it, but it wasn't something that they seemed like they were going to go back to, or something that people would really recommend. Unfortunately, it was always Scott Snyder's run that got all the acclaim, and I think it's because of the fact that this was never the leader of any events that really took part throughout this book. It was always just the accomplice, it was always somebody that just had to deal with the fallout, and because of that I feel like it's naturally a bit relegated. It's just something that I think people should be aware of if they haven't read this and maybe they're considering it, that you don't feel like you really get one creator's true vision for this book. And at one point there's such a jarring shift in the plot of this book that you may even have to go somewhere else to check when a certain event happened, which I'm not going to spoil right here. It's not like there was just something that happened off panel that someone makes a passing mention to in a dialogue bubble. The actual bones of this story is changed. And if you've watched this channel before, you know that the New 52 is my jam. You probably just said it at the same time as me, and if you didn't, that was kind of awkward. And I respect that it was a time about changing things up, about doing new things and seeing what worked and what didn't, but I didn't like the change to Two-Face's origins. I actually wasn't a fan of this storyline between him and McKillen at all. I felt it could have been much shorter, and I also actually wish it didn't exist in this book, especially because of the fact that there was already so much going on in the Batman universe. I felt like this slowed down the pace of this book, and it just could have been done better. Two-Face is probably one of my top 3 Batman villains, and I feel like he is underused, so it was nice to see him included, and they did a good way of building it up that he was coming. They made him this threat that you were anticipating his arrival, but I didn't really feel like I actually got the payoff with that. The storyline became more about this new villain, so I didn't even really understand why we had so much build up for him when the story wasn't even about him at the end. Where this series really did hit its stride was with the Bat family itself. In the first couple of times that I saw them, I felt like it was cool, but I didn't really think it was going to be integral to the story. But as we got to the end, I realized that this was all about the importance of who those people are for Bruce Wayne. He's always been set in the mindset of being this person who works alone, but that isn't the case. He's actually got so many people around him that support him, and he can also hurt them sometimes. So even though he goes through this great learning curve of being both a father and also a mentor for his son, you also realize that he's learning how to become part of a family again. I like that the other members of the Bat family seem to have a bit more agency as well. They weren't just going to sit there and take any shit that was handed to them, and it made me excited to revisit a lot of their other runs, which is the point of crossovers in the first place. So I loved how he emphasized how important Batman's circle is to him. It reminded me of what I've heard about the James Tynion run, which yes, is going to be reviewed in future, so make sure that you subscribe. Similarly, I feel like Alfred had a great presence in this book. It feels like Alfred's always a bit of an afterthought that, oh, if Batman's in the cave, Alfred must appear, but it felt like he had much more of a presence, which again just highlights that key theme of family. And the inclusion of Titus was great. Of course, I'm always going to love when a dog appears in a book, and those themes about how Bruce's actions affect everybody around him also continues when you see other members from the DC universe cropping up. I'm not going to spoil who exactly appears, but there were a few that really caught me by surprise, and I liked seeing how Batman treats those people, and one of which even came back to haunt him a little bit later on in the story, and I liked that. And I think with those moments we got a glimpse into what he really wanted to do. It's just a shame that we're never really going to see exactly what his plan was for this series if it wasn't the case that everybody else was just interrupting it. But there is definitely a lot to love in this book, and I think if you've got some kind of knowledge of what was going on around those times and particular events that might have affected it, you're still going to have a good time with this series. This is your final spoiler warning. If you don't want anything in this book ruined for you, make sure that you skip to the final verdict down below. How in the fuck was the death of Damian not included in this book? How do you kill off one of the title characters and not even having like a little page that goes, look guys, that Damian guy that you just got attached to, he has died in Grant Morrison's Batman Incorporated. You may want to read that. If not, at least you know that he's dead now. I didn't click in until the silent issue, which admittedly was amazing. This was probably the best issue in this story, but I don't really use this a lot, but I think the way that it handled that, considering the fact that Tomasi didn't actually get to kill Damian off, it was somebody else who did it, I felt like that was beautiful. And if anything, I think it added to it because of the fact that it was Grant Morrison that killed off Damian, so almost it's like Tomasi reacting to that in a similar way that Bruce Wayne just had to react. But I knew that Damian died at some point during this run. I just thought that it was much later, so if there's anybody like me, I feel like just having a page saying, yeah, this is a point where that happened, would have completely changed the way that I felt about this book. But when I did realise that, I actually went back and read the issue before that, where it was like in Damian's dream state, where he's just having like the most perfect day. I really liked that. It was so much sweeter the second time around when I realised what had happened. And I'd encourage anybody who's read this book and also went through that same kind of whirlwind as me, where you didn't realise until after it had already happened, to go back and just revisit that issue. Because I go back and forth with Damian because I loved what I saw from him in Super Sons, and I loved the dynamic between him and John. But when there's an adult there, especially somebody who's in the Batman costume, I just find him obnoxious and rude, and I don't like him. Especially sometimes when he could be rude to Alfred. That really pissed me off. Like, this is Alfred. You treat him with some fucking respect. I think this speaks to the strength of Tomasi's writing though, that when Bruce was going through that grief period, I ended up missing Damian a bit. And especially in something that's coming out in single issues, when you've got all these events that are going on around it, I felt like we could have ended up rushing the grief story arc, but it was an integral part to the majority of this story. Until Damian came back, you knew that he was following him throughout, but I do wish that they could have tied it a little bit more to the fact that this is the second Robin that has died underneath Batman's wing. Even though I didn't like a lot of his actions during that time, I understood that this was coming from a great place of emotional struggle. Like the part where he dissected Frankenstein was just weird to me, and I felt like he was unusually cruel. I liked that series that was Frankenstein and the Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. or whatever it was called. That was something that I really liked, so to see Frankenstein here and to just be mutilated like that, I was like, come on Bruce, you're better than this. I also felt like he was really mean to all the members of the Justice League, but he just gets across that point that Damian is more important to him than anything. And you saw that in the way that he almost killed himself just to see if he could get Damian back. One thing that I wasn't a fan of was how important Darkseid was into Damian's resurrection. He'd set up some cool fights and the scenery was great, you know, mad shout out to Gleason for just nailing that part of the book, but it didn't feel natural. It's almost as if they went, what's the biggest thing that we can do to make this the biggest story possible? Oh, go for Darkseid. When it looked like it was going to be Ra's that was going to be involved in that, it felt like that was a logical step for this story. You also had this weird back and forth fight between him and Bruce of who was actually going to get the body, which allowed us to look into the psychosis of both of them. Were they actually doing this because they wanted Damian back, or because they wanted to prove that they were better than the other? But before we could get to the logical conclusion of that, Darkseid was introduced, and it was almost like the race stuff was for nothing. But considering the rest of the story and that it felt like it was trying to resemble some kind of realism, this was the part where I really checked out. Like, yeah, they did have an explanation for why it happened. I'm just saying that it felt like it was jumping the shark a bit. You've gone from this very human grief side to all of a sudden going into some kind of intergalactic battle just to see if you can get him back. But with Darkseid, because of the fact that we know that Batman's human, you know he isn't just going to kill him and have that be the end of the book. They're not going to kill both the title characters in this. Although I'm not going to lie, that could have been interesting. And even though I'm a bit meh on the resurrection itself, Damian getting powers as a result of that was a really interesting part of this book. Sure, it was as it was coming to the end of this book, but I think considering that period of grief that we'd just gone through for about 12 or so issues, I think it was just nice to return to the classic storytelling that we'd got at the beginning. It felt like just your standard goofy Batman and Robin adventure, which is something that I felt like this book was trying to capture throughout it. Because even in the beginning, you had stuff like Court of Owls and Death of the Family just all of a sudden taking more precedent over the story that was going on. It makes sense in the wider scheme of the event, but when you're reading one series, that complete run throughout without any of those other titles, you just wonder what was the point. Instead of just doing 1 or 2 issues that completely pause the book that you're reading, why not give this like an exempt card because of the fact that I'm not even sure what happened in Court of Owls now. But stuff like that was what stopped this from being an all-time classic run. There was an insanely great costume design in the Terminus arc, even if the villain during this part reminded me of the one from the Umbrella Academy. And Hellbat was great too. I am really tempted to buy the McFarlane Toys version of this because I just want that on my shelf. The Justice League cameos were fun as well, and it helped this to have a really good final arc. I also, in a cynical way, like how the rest of the Bat family took advantage of Cyborg's good nature, but still stayed true to those characters because despite that, Cyborg still helped out the rest of the team. But this is one of the reasons why I want to see this creative team take on Justice League, and it was a much needed reprieve after the Two-Face storyline that had just come before it. I was really disappointed by this bit, and worse so because of the fact that they'd been building it up in the last couple of pages for the issues that came before it. The Joker gets so much love that it feels like the rest of his villains just get overshadowed all the time, so I was like, great, this is going to be the quintessential Two-Face story. But then all of a sudden they just switched gears so that it was mainly about this McKillen girl. Did not like it. I hated even more so that they made it that she was directly connected to the reason why he became Two-Face. I felt like they did this just to make McKillen seem more powerful when we already know exactly why Two-Face is the way that he is. And if you think I'm being pedantic about that, imagine that instead of the Joker shooting Barbara Gordon in the spine, it would have been this McKillen girl. I just feel like if you're trying to position your character as more powerful, don't have them just redo the same thing that somebody else has done. Make them do something different that proves exactly who they are. This didn't help set McKillen apart, and in all honesty, she was that forgettable, I actually had to Google what her name was. Which is a shame because I like the more street level Batman stories, especially considering the fact that we just had Darkseid after that. So this was one of the last proper chances in this book to tell a really great Batman detective story, and they just kind of fudged it up a bit so that they could introduce somebody that we didn't really care about. One thing that I also liked, which I stupidly didn't even touch on when I was filming my original review, was the conclusion to the first story arc within the New 52. I loved all this stuff with Morgan. I didn't even realise that he wasn't somebody that hadn't appeared in the 80 so years of Batman stories that had come before it, but I felt like this gave us a taste of what could have come for later on in the series if it would have been that Damian hadn't been killed so early on in it, because of the fact that you've got this dichotomy between Bruce, who believes in not killing any villain under any given circumstance, but then you've got Damian, who was obviously trained under Ra's al Ghul and the Al Ghul family, so he's got a different approach to it all, and I like that he tried. It seemed like he was getting to a point where he might be learning Bruce's methodology and accepting that, but then at one point he was just like, nah, fuck it, and killed Morgan. The move itself, which Damian uses, I like that was foreshadowed earlier on. It was great that that was done rather than it being just a surprise out of nowhere, because I remember thinking in the back of my head, is that something that's going to be useful later on in this story? So it was just cool that it was included. I also just found it funny that this was a more shocking moment than the death of Robin. I did hope as well that this might have played a bit more into the story overall, and it's unfortunate that it didn't, but the shock of this moment was great, and it reminded me of stuff like the end of Umbrella Academy, the first volume, and also the first volume of Uncanny X-Force. And it is moments like this that make me like duos like Bruce and Damian because of the fact that they've got two different ways of thinking about things. Another thing that I was disappointed in was Carrie Kelly, because it really looked like after the death of Damian, they were positioning her to become the new Robin. She seemed to have some kind of great detective aptitude to her. She obviously had a connection to Damian, and it also seemed like there was a good dynamic between her and Bruce. But within this book, that didn't really go anywhere, and it's a shame because there was even a cover where she was in the Robin costume, which is what I was saying was one of my main problems with this book overall, that it just felt like it never really got a chance to grow into the book that it wanted to become. I imagine the editors at DC had the final say in exactly when Damian needed to be resurrected, so of course Tomasi had to rush his storyline a bit, in which case it feels like Carrie Kelly probably would have been better suited if she wasn't in this book at all. But the team up of Batgirl, Red Hood, and also Tim Drake was one of the highlights of this book. Yeah, it was incorporated into all that Darkseid stuff, but it was just great seeing the Bat family come together. And I have to stress that the first story with Dick as Batman was great, and I feel like it's really underrated. People remember the rest of this run, but they seem to forget that somebody other than Grant Morrison wrote Dick Grayson as Batman. I wish we could have seen more of Tomasi writing them two as a team and just continuing that balance between the two. And maybe this is me just speaking as a biased Dick Grayson fan, but 3 issues just wasn't enough for that, and I loved the way they incorporated it into Arkham Asylum. He really gave this unknown villain a great presence to him that I think is what they should have tried to do when they were going to McKillen. This is my final verdict. And this is a really fun book. Unfortunately, as we've already seen in the 10 years since this book debuted, it's always going to be second place to Scott Snyder's run. But just because Snyder's run is remembered more, did bigger things, and also seemed to lead the charge for the rest of the Batman books that this one also had to follow in line with, it doesn't mean that this isn't worth a read and that it doesn't have its own merits. Had this one come out at another time and been allowed to just do its own thing without being so impacted by other events that were going on throughout the universe, this combination of Tomasi and Gleason had the opportunity to write one of the best modern runs in Batman history. We had so many glimpses to the potential of what it could have been if it hadn't have been derailed so much by a book that isn't even included in this omnibus. And the only evidence that I need to point towards that conclusion is those early issues that happened before Flashpoint. This run is still great, and I have to stress that, and I would recommend this to anybody who does want to read a fun Batman run. And even better than that, it made me excited to read more from this creative team in the Superman run that's coming out soon. But what I would recommend to anybody who's going to read this is adjust your expectations if you think this is going to be on the same level as the mainline Batman New 52 run. But it's titles like this though that remind me why the New 52 is my jam, because it reminded me of when I was first getting into comics and that excitement that I felt. And at the end of the day, that's what comics is about, having fun and enjoying yourself. And I think overall, Batman and Robin by Peter J. Tomasi and Patrick Gleason did that for me. But still, when I think about it as a whole and I balance up the theme of family and the dynamic between Bruce and Damian, this spectacular art from Patrick Gleason that really gave this Batman title a unique style, but then with the disappointment of the missed potential, the other events that affected this storyline to the point where it completely changed course, along with the fact that it felt like it never really got a chance to mature into the story that it wanted to be from the beginning, I do have to give this a very modest 60%. Woof woof. And I'm going to start ranking the New 52 titles that I've read on this channel, so even though I did enjoy this, I do still think that Aquaman beats it. So that's my review. Comment below if you've read it and what you thought of it, and what other New 52 runs you'd like to see me review in future. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up, and if you didn't, why did you get this far? I've got my social media links in the description down below, along with a tip jar if you do want to help the channel out. It is greatly appreciated. Share this video wherever you can so that we can start more of a discussion and get some love back for the New 52, which should be your jam as well as mine. But until next time, just make sure that you stay safe, stay reading the best books that you can find, and stay mad all you dogs. Woof woof! See you at the next video.